coconut oil is made of two fats, and one of them doesn't need any enzymes. So if they cook with coconut oil, they're getting some fat benefit without needing any enzymes at all. You stop them being in a smoky room with cooking in the house. You stop them being exposed as far as you can to cigarette smoke. These are all free, you see. And this isn't quite free, but it should be part of good management anyway. Good documentation and good follow-up. In Russia, Moscow, leading center in the whole of Russia, they did not weigh children. They measured them. They measured them very badly. They had an old ruler on the wall that was nailed on, and the child stood there and they just put a piece of wood against it and read it off in whole centimeters, which isn't good enough. But not only did they not measure them very well, and they didn't do their weights when we started, but they didn't have growth charts. And one of the first things we did on our ward in Southampton, I stole 60 weight charts. I borrowed 60 weight charts. And their children now, every 2 months, when they went back for this study, they had to be plotted and accurately weighed and measured, which they were. So, if you can't do that lot, there's not much point in the next lot, right? Now, I've invented this, and it's different for different places, but what would be the next thing if you still are very low resources? Well, you might at least have a nurse who could go to the home sometimes and see if they're doing what they're trying to should be doing. You can at least do simple x-rays, because that's not a CF special thing. You might begin to do research, which is data collection. You would do basic lab tests. It may not even be for Pseudomonas, this germ that not every lab can pick that up. And you'd use ordinary basic, the penicillins and common antibiotics, and you talk to them. Right, next. Now, we're beginning to go up the cost, but we've got enzymes, intravenous antibiotics, vitamin supplements, and microbiology that can pick up your nasty germs. But I would actually say that you don't even do this lot, which is what we've all been talking about, sort of good, real, this is beginning to be specific CF. But you shouldn't really be doing that if you're not doing that and you're not doing that. Okay, next. Right, then you start getting into the expensive antibiotics, and you've got food supplements, the things that contain calories, or there's elemental diets. And in India, they actually, some of the food they have is like some of their dal, their pulses, are almost like an elemental diet. They're digested very easily with very little enzyme. So that probably moves down here in an Indian setting. Okay, next. Right. Now, DNase is something that is inhaled, that loosens the phlegm in the lungs, and it's a very good help for physiotherapy. But when I was with Sushil the first time, I went to the home of some very wealthy Indian couple with a CF child, and they were on the internet, and they had friends in England and airline pilots and everything. They said, "We want DNase, we really want this. We've read it on the literature, it's wonderful stuff." But when we talked to them in their home, those parents didn't do physiotherapy. So they weren't doing, where am I? Down here somewhere. They weren't doing the physio down here. They weren't doing physiotherapy. And DNase is a help to physiotherapy. And it can cost you £10,000 a year. What does DNase cost now? £10,000 a year. So do you use something for £10,000 a year that helps physiotherapy if you don't do physiotherapy? And the answer is no. So that's what I call jumping the gun, moving in there. And this DNase on my first graph is over at this end. Do you see it's going from your 90% to your 92%. It's not on the first part at all. Right, next. And then gene therapy, 10 years ago, that was just coming in, and everybody thought within a few years that would all happen, and it hasn't actually happened, so we can probably delete that one. Is it going to happen?
10 years time.
Another 10 years, okay, another 10 years. So, but that, DNase and gene therapy are over here on the graph. All right, they're off the map. And then finally, lung transplant. Again, if it's an individual family and they have the money and they're going to do something, that's fine. And it's cheaper for them to fly to a European country to get their lung transplant than to do it in India. A little aside for appropriate technology, I did a project in Jordan about 15 years ago, just before the Russian campaign, so 11 years ago. And I was giving a lecture, in fact, to all the pediatricians of Jordan. There's only 200, it's a small country. And they were all in the room, and I was going on about something, and somebody came and said, Dr. Rose, excuse me, can I make an announcement? I said, go ahead. So he said, I want to announce that we have just done the first successful heart transplant in Jordan. And all of the audience, they were shouting, and they were very happy, and my lecture just lost everything. But finally they settled down, and I finished early. And I thought, well, that's very interesting. And they were so proud. We are the first Arab country to do a heart transplant. We are not just a third world country to do measles vaccination, because they had that this now and they've got another one, but they didn't do it. And we went back and worked out that to give measles vaccination to the whole of Jordan, which would have saved 300 deaths a year, which was their death rate from measles, would have cost less than one heart transplant. So you sort of say, well, do you do one heart transplant if you can save 300 lives every year from measles? And so on this graph, in terms of official policy in a developing country with limited resources, it's starting down here, and then when you've got that, you go to here, and when you've got that, you go to here, and it's moving up. And to jump the gun on some of these is simply inexpensive, is an expensive way of not being so very effective. So this again is an IBM special from Steve. So what he's done, and it's absolutely right. You see, we're now saying this is the benefit for well-being this way, and the diminishing returns, and he's put the other graph on the same scale. Okay, so I think that's the last of those graphs, isn't it? And then I'll stop that. Oh, I'm not there yet. Have I got a few minutes?
Yes, you have.
Yeah. Okay. So, what else can you do if your resources are poor? Or what else did we do in Russia? Now, one of the things we did was form a collaboration, but it was a collaboration on a basis that was different from what often happens. And instead of saying what might happen in India or somewhere, I want to actually say what happened in Moscow. Now, if you imagine, this is the CF Center in Moscow before we had our link. It did have some contact with other countries. They had 3 of their doctors the year before had actually gone to the US, to Washington, to a conference. And they had never been out of Russia. This was so exciting, and they went to Washington, and they were in the Hilton Hotel, and they went to the conference center, and they didn't present anything. They felt too inadequate, and they listened to things about gene therapy or DNAs or, incredible complex studies, and they felt more and more hopeless. And at the end of the conference, because they had no money even to travel outside, they then went home again. They never spoke to an American physician or a physiotherapist or a dietitian. They never saw a patient. They didn't see inside a hospital. They didn't even have a chance to be tourists. They did nothing. And when they went home, they felt terrible. They said, we just thought we are so hopeless. These people in this conference, they know so much, they do all this research, we have nothing. And then they occasionally had visitors, and these would come out of the blue. A doctor, an American or a German or a Brit, would be in Moscow on holiday and would say, oh, let's contact the CF clinic. And so this doctor would come and meet them and say, how are you? And it's wonderful. And they'd show this American doctor, they told me about one. Golly, are you still doing that here? They were doing their best, but their facilities were awful. And this American doctor sort of criticized them and talked down to them and said, can't you do better than that? Why do you do this? Why? Oh, we don't do that in America. We have better things than all these things. And then as a present, he sent them some out-of-date antibiotics, a box of time-expired antibiotics. That was it. They also had a visit from somebody from Solvay. This was Martin, who you know. And he was very helpful. He actually took them all out to a meal, because that's what pharmaceutical companies often do.